Welcome to this programming tutorial. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how we can use selection statements to get our character on the right here to move left and right. Before we start, I've opened up my game folder with my game code from last lesson, and I've opened up my Super Mario character over here. What we're going to do first is we're going to load in some code that I've already written for you. This code enables you to select different keys on the keyboard and assign different tasks for them to do. So when you press on a button on your keyboard, my controller should allow you to move the character left and right. To do this, I've downloaded the controller from our team space, and I've put the gamesetup.js file in the exact same location as all of my other files. Before we can use it, we need to link that JS file into my program. To link it, or to link another file, we're going to do it up here underneath the style tag, but still within the head tag. To link it, we will use a script tag, but instead of writing code in the middle, we're going to add an attribute to our script tag. The attribute we're going to add is source, src. The source is the name of the game, gamesetup.js. You'll notice Visual Studio Code has already picked up on that. Note that we only have to write the file name because we stored it in the exact same location as this HTML file. If you stored it in a different location, you'll have to put the folder path as well. If I save this and I refresh my screen, nothing happens on the screen, which is good. And if I right click and click inspect, we'll see that there are no errors in the console, which is also good. Now that we've got that, we can now begin to update our character's position. At the moment, and I'll zoom in here, our character is drawn by calling the image file, writing its X position at 0 and its Y position at 0. That's what put it sit up here in the top corner. If I change this to 100 and I refresh my screen, the character moves slightly to the right. We want to make this part of the draw image dynamic. In other words, we want to be able to change that when we want. At the moment it's static because we're writing 100 or we're writing 0 directly into the draw image subroutine over here. Let's modify that, so instead of being 100, it's a variable, like our image variable over here. Let's go up to the top, and to keep the code nice and consistent and neat, let's put this underneath the Super Mario variables. That way we know that everything underneath this one belongs to the Super Mario variable. You don't have to do it this way, but it's a good standard. We'll start by writing var, and since this is going to store the X variable of our Super Mario character, let's write Super Mario X, and we'll make that equal 0 to start with. Now, let's go down and change that 100 into Super Mario X. If I save it, you'll notice this is at 0 like it was before. This is because we set Super Mario X to equal 0, and this looks at that variable, as you can see from the highlight over here, and knows that it equals 0. What we mentioned in the last lesson was that we have a clear function to wipe the screen clean, a draw function to draw the characters back on, a loop function to repeat, but we also have this update function which we're going to use to organize the movement of our character. Let's play with a little example. I'm going to move the character right. We'll say every time it does an update, the Super Mario X is going to equal to whatever it currently is. In the beginning of the game it'll be 0, and we're going to add 5 to whatever it currently is. Now every time it runs the clear update draw loop, it's going to continuously add 5 pixels to my Super Mario X variable. And because we're drawing Super Mario X here, or we're drawing with Super Mario X here, this should cause my character to move continuously and infinitely to the right. And there we go. Now, obviously this is not what we want. We want the character to be able to move left and right. And we can modify that by saying -5 instead of +5. But again, we only want that to happen when the character is being moved by the player. So let's introduce some selection statements. A selection statement is a great way to define two or more paths for a program to take. You have an if, elif, or else if, and an else statement. These three commands make up one selection block. You can have as many of these as you want in a program. But there are some rules for each block. Each block has to start with an if. If is the only one that is required in every single block. Else if only happens if you want to do more than one branching path. You don't have to have else if you don't want to. But if you do have else if, it always has to go after if. You can also have else. Else goes at the very, very bottom of a selection block. And it's like a bucket that sits at the bottom and catches every command or every condition that wasn't true. Else doesn't have to be there, but it always has to go at the very bottom. You can only have one if, you can only have one else, but you can have an infinite amount of else ifs. Keep in mind, if you don't have else if, you can still have else, but it has to go at the very bottom. Right, next steps. We have our if block started with if. We now need to specify a condition. For example, you might say, if raining outside, take an umbrella. In this case, we want to check if a button is being pressed. Now we can check for buttons. If I search for JavaScript key codes over here, and we go to one of these ones over here, you can see that every time I press a button, it corresponds to a key on my keyboard. So left arrow is 37, right arrow is 39, A is 65, D is 68, and so on. In this code over here, in this programming code, in this update function, we're going to use the key codes to reference the button. Let's make our character move left and right using A and D. So we'll say if A, which is in this case 68, in keys down, then we're going to do something. Keys down is part of the code that I've written for you already. It holds all of the keys that you could possibly press on the keyboard. And you're saying, if you see the number 68 being pressed in the keys down list, which is the list that holds all the buttons that are pressed down by the user, then we know that the D arrow has been pressed. Notice I've also put these two little brackets here. Much like our function, everything that happens when this condition is true occurs in between these brackets. If it's not in between these brackets, it won't happen if this is false. Sorry, if this is true. So in this case, what do you want to happen when the D key is pressed? Well, we want the Super Mario character to move right. Now I could have another if block underneath, where instead of A and D, we press A, which is 65. And then we can make the character move left. Now this would work, and it'd work perfectly fine. But we want to think about the logic here. In our game, we only want our character to move left or right. We don't want the person to try and move them both left and right. So instead of having two if blocks, let's connect these together by putting else if. Now only one of these will run. Either it's 68, else it's 65. Let's try this and see if our program works. So if I press D, my character moves right. If I press A, my character moves left. And that's all you need to do. Thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope you found it helpful.